Hi, my name is Bob Smith. You may remember me from my years with Pro Wrestling Illustrated and a host of other professional wrestling magazines.
I'm Joe Puccio.
And this is It's the Outdated Wrestling Hour. Thought you booted me to the curb, didn't you? Oh, geez. Anyway, he's still here. In any event, give us just a couple of minutes. We've got a very special show for you this week. We've got Steve Gennarelli from Stick to Wrestling with John McAdam from the Arcadian Vanguard Network on our show. We're going to talk about great WrestleMania moments since it's WrestleMania season. So you know what? Listen to this funky little theme. We got a commercial break just for a second. We'll get right into the action with Joe and Steve and the best of WrestleMania, at least as far as we're concerned. It's the Outdated Wrestling Hour. We'll be right back. Well, I reckon it's time to do a little bit of an update for the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. Let's see what shows you can enjoy several times every week. They've got a veritable cornucopia of wrestling podcasts, so let's dig into it. Pretty much the flagship of WrestleCopia is the Wrestling Memory Grenade. Join host Ray Russell as he analyzes and discusses years of wrestling history from your favorite promotions. From Hulkamania to Mulkymania, from the Midnight Express to the Lex Express, they've got it all. Tune in and get a big piece of history on the Wrestling Memory Grenade. If you like nostalgia, this one's for you. The Wrestling Stoop with Bob Roop. What a legend Bob Roop is, and he welcomes you to the Wrestling Stoop as he shares stories, historical moments, and all kinds of memories from his 20-plus year career as a wrestler and booker. And you know he got wild near the end of his career. Find out all of it on the Wrestling Stoop with Bob Roop. One of the most unique wrestling podcasts anywhere is DG's Puro Wrestling Academy. Join host Dan as he travels back in time to discuss the history of pro wrestling in Japan. He's spent decades studying the world of Japanese pro wrestling. Now he offers up his historian-level knowledge to you. You'll learn something on every single show, I guarantee it. That's DG's Puro Wrestling Academy. The great Gene Jackson hosts the Retro Wrestling Review. That's RE-View. Brings in a variety of co-hosts and wrestling legends to the program as he goes back in time to watch and review pro wrestling from years goes by. Get the breakdown here at never-before-heard stories, and feel free to watch along with them. It's worth it, let me tell you, especially if you're a USWA fan. Enjoy the Retro Wrestling Review. When this show started not all that long ago, it was called Dangerous Conversations with Doug Gilbert. Now it's Dangerous Conversations with Doug Gilbert and Tommy Rich. Two of the great stars from Memphis and beyond. You'll learn all about them, hear great old school stories, stuff you've never heard before, definitely on Dangerous Conversations with Doug Gilbert and Tommy Rich. One of my personal favorite podcasts out there is Wrestling Nostalgia with Dave Dynasty, a meat and potatoes name for a anything but a meat and potatoes show. Join him as he reminisces about pro wrestling history with a variety of legendary guests and topics. And what I like about him, he knows everything about Dick the Bruiser, Bruiser Bedlam, and the WWA. But that's only part of what you'll hear on Wrestling Nostalgia with Dave Dynasty. It was the WWF versus WCW, Raw versus Nitro, the Monday Night War, the Ratings War, the NWO, the Attitude Era. Now, there's a podcast all about it. It's called Monday Warfare, Raw versus Nitro. They break it down with episode reviews, you name it. If you want to know all about that classic ratings war, listen to Monday Warfare, Raw versus Nitro. One of the most unique podcasts you'll hear anywhere is the Other Ship podcast. It's a pop culture contest with a pro wrestling lean. Join a rotating group of co-hosts as they talk movies, sports, music, TV, food, and of course, pro wrestling. They take on various topics in roundtable discussions, special guest interviews, and other content concepts. As they say, laugh your ass off on this voyage aboard the other ship. New episodes are in the bag for the Captain's Corner pod. Join Captain Nick as he presents the Captain's Corner podcast. It features old school wrestling interviews and discussions, plus all the latest goings on in the world of the Captain's adventures. Nothing else quite like the Captain's Corner pod. Also on the WrestleCopia network, the Glory Days GrappleCon cast. Hosts Barry and Captain Nick present the Glory Days GrappleCon podcast featuring memories and special interviews with wrestling stars of the past and even those of today. There's even more at WrestleCopia, a podcast called TR Shocks the World, the WCNN News, and the Power Hour. It's quite a lineup with more new podcasts joining all the time. It's the WrestleCopia Podcast Network. How do you get involved? It's pretty easy. Go to their constantly updated website, WrestleCopia.com. Click a few buttons to take a voyage into wrestling's past, present, and future. Get it all at WrestleCopia. Well, it's March. That means a bunch of things. March Madness. That means baseball spring training. And it means I go in for my annual lumbago check. But in any event, I've got two wonderful guests here. And we're going to talk about, well, what we're really here for. Talk about our memories of some WrestleMania matches we thought were really cool. First of all, Joe Puccio remained with us. Thanks for hanging around, man. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you, Bob. I'm happy to be here too for a little longer this week, and I'll kind of join in on the discussion with your esteemed guest here.
Well, I'm not paying you double. I'll tell you that right now. So forget it. And our special guest here is truly a special guy. You know him from Stick to Wrestling with John McAdam on the Arcadian Vanguard Network. He is a walking encyclopedia of wrestling knowledge and one of the coolest cats you will ever meet. It's Steve Gennarelli. Welcome back.
Well, it's great to be here with you, Bob and Joe, and it's great to talk to you about WrestleMania. This is that time of the year that we like to talk about our favorite sport, wrestling, and to kind of get started, I wanted to ask Joe a couple of questions because he's new to the show, he's new to the Outdated Wrestling Hour, and I was curious because I know from his background he's written for the Observer, he's written for the Torch, he's been on this great Bob Smith show. But I'm curious, like, what got him into wrestling? What turned him on? Like, what's his wrestling origin story?
Absolutely. I have a very specific origin story. I won't take too long. It's a fairly short story, but basically what happened was I wasn't really too aware of wrestling. I was hanging out with my friend Joey Osa, one of my best friends, kids, and we're out in the playing ball out in the front of the street, just horsing around with a bunch of the other kids on the block. We went into one of their houses to get something to drink or something like that. Next thing I know, I see a video cassette. This was VHS was just getting big at that point, just coming out, and sitting right on top of the VCR was a copy of WrestleMania 1.
Wow.
And it had just been released, I think. So whatever the time frame was from when it actually happened to when they released, I don't know. But it was sitting there, it was brand new. And I guess his parents had rented it for him. And I asked the other kid that was there, I said, what's that all about? He's like, oh, it's, WrestleMania. And next thing, we were all kind of tired. We wanted to take a little break from being outside. We threw it into the VCR. We watched about half of it. And then we all kind of got tired and we wanted to go outside and play some more. And I got to say, I was probably the only one that really wasn't too keen on going back out because I was like, I couldn't believe what I had just seen. Like I just couldn't believe it. It was just, and I can't tell you which matches, obviously I know the matches on the show, but I don't know exactly what we watched that day, but I was mesmerized, and they're all just kind of brushing it off, going to the next thing. And I was like, I got to watch more of this.
I know what it was. It must have been Buddy Rose's The Execution. That must have been.
That might have been it. and that was it. And then from that, I just remember going home, telling my parents, and they were like, okay, They used to watch them when they were younger, and next thing you know, they started renting the videos from me. I found out when it was on TV. That was appointment viewing for me every single Saturday morning, Saturday night, Sunday, whatever it was on in the New York area back then. It's been I guess you can call it a semi-obsession ever since.
No, I think that's a great story, and what makes it really interesting is, I mean, how it ties in with our subject for today. I mean, I've talked to lots of wrestling fans over the years, but I've never really met anybody whose first wrestling that they ever saw was the first WrestleMania. I mean, that's really unique.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It's I don't know. I might have caught it on television before that and just not really, kind of flipping through the channels and for whatever reason, maybe just not really leaving an impression on me. But I have a very vivid memory of that. Yeah, it's just and that's one of the reasons we'll talk about it in a few minutes too, but that's one of the reasons why I know the first WrestleMania might not be considered the greatest in ring of all the WrestleManias, but not only because it's the first, but because of that nostalgia factor, it'll always be my favorite for that reason alone.
Well, how about you, Bob? I mean, you've been watching wrestling since 1970, and I know maybe even in '85, maybe you weren't even like heavily into wrestling at that time. Maybe your focus was on something else. But how did you feel like when this first WrestleMania like kind of snuck up upon us?
My wrestling thing never waned. It
Really?
never waned. No, I was always into it. Anything, any federation, any league, anytime it was on, I would watch it. I don't care what else was on TV if there was a wrestling show. Of course, it was all syndication back then.
Right,
But
right, right.
but if I had an opportunity to watch any wrestling from anywhere in the country, that was it. And I would start in 1979. I taped it all too on my $1,000 VCR. I won't talk about that anymore. But but you know what? If you want to talk about first time I ever really saw wrestling, I'm looking for cartoons. This had to be in the 1960s, right? I'm probably the mid 60s. I'm flipping the dial, and wrestling is on, and a guy who looked, I don't know who it was. It looked like Vern Gagne was being interviewed, and he had blood all over his face.
Oh my goodness.
So I go in to see my mom, who's having coffee with my aunt, and I go, "There's a guy on TV. There's a wrestler. He's bleeding." And my mom, who was always, always did her best to soothe me, said, "Yeah, they do that." That was her response. Yeah, yeah, that happens. They do it.
So,
Said,
Bob,
"Don't worry." She said, "Don't worry about it." So she was very blasé about the gore I had just seen on the TV, but that was my real first memory of wrestling was seeing this bald wrestler with blood all over his face being interviewed. So that was, a little jarring for little Bobo.
were you was WrestleMania one like your first closed circuit event? Had you ever gone to see any closed circuit wrestling before then?
I didn't see it closed circuit. I had to wait for
No,
the VHS to come out.
really?
Yeah, I was in upstate New York back then, and we didn't have a theater that was showing. So it was so no, I didn't get to see that until 6 months later, whatever, when the VHS tape came out.
Well, just to tell you guys and to tell the listeners, I attended with my best friends, Dave Rogan and his family, his dad, and I think another couple of friends. And this was in Binghamton, my hometown. There was a small place called the Masonic Temple, which I guess was probably used to be like a place for religious events and
Right.
local social municipal events. And that's where they had WrestleMania one at. We
Really?
walked in and they had a big, it was a screen. It almost felt what might be today, like a big screen TV. I mean, it wasn't really like a movie screen, but the people that were there, I think, was a sellout, and the people popped for everything. I mean, from the beginning of the show to each star that was on the show, they just popped for it, and it was just so cool because even though I've been to like live wrestling many times, seeing it with like a hardcore group of hardcore fans, and they're hearing Monsoon, they're hearing Jesse. I mean, people are just popping like crazy, and it was such a fun event to attend. It was a lot of fun.
Steve, do you remember by any chance what that ticket cost to see it
It
on closed
probably
circuit?
it probably cost in the range of I would think probably around $10 to $12, no more than that, honestly.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That makes sense.
And I looked up on the very respectable Wikipedia. I guess they had about a million buys on that first show. A million people went to closed circuit on that first show. So you can just imagine the huge revenue that Vince brought in on that. So, but anyhow, Bob, it's your show. I'm sure you got a million questions.
It is my show.
Yeah.
I'm having more fun listening to you two guys, to be honest with you. But anyway, all right. Before we get started, even with the WrestleMania memory, let's. I just want to rewind to this past weekend when we had the Elimination Chamber and the big John Cena goes bad bit, and Rock wants Cody Rhodes' soul. First of all, I want to say this about what's been going on lately. As much as I've enjoyed the recent WWE product, I'm getting very tired of this was the biggest gate we've ever had in this arena. This was the biggest event in the history of everything. The big, 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 big. I am so tired of them touting their own, tooting their own horn, so to speak. I'm tired. Just show the freaking matches, will ya? I mean, everything is like so big now that it's losing any sense of intimacy or any sense of sport. It's like like I said, wrestling is like a Taylor Swift concert now, particularly when you price the tickets.
Yeah.
It's and I can't complain because, like I said, I've always said, "Oh, Knicks tickets, New York Knicks tickets at the Garden are too expensive." No, it's not. They fill the Garden every week. It's too expensive for me. That's the fact of the matter, right?
Right.
So all I know is this: it's getting almost too. I don't know how to put it. It's
Overproduced.
overproduced. Yeah, it's almost too slick at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And nothing is succinct in WWE. Nothing. If somebody turns, that thing lasted what, 10 minutes? I just want your guys' impressions on the Cena scowling at the camera routine and the whole concept of what they did.
I just want to say I thought I was going to say pay-per-view, but I guess it's a PLE now. So
That's right.
I thought the entire PLE was actually one of the best shows on a whole that WWE ever did. I thought it flowed really well, despite it being overly long, as they all are now, and despite the time in between matches ridiculously long. But I mean, that's just the way that they produce their shows nowadays, and there's really no way around that. But overall, I thought the order of the matches was excellent. And I will say that you're asking specifically about the Cena turn, is that the reason why I thought it was a phenomenal angle is because I don't think anybody expected it. I don't think anybody predicted it. It wasn't something that people going in were saying, "Oh, I know Cena's going to turn bad," and this everybody knows what's going to happen. Nobody predicted it, yet it wasn't, for me anyway. It wasn't done for purely shock value, and I think that's what happens a lot of times in wrestling in the modern era, is that they'll just do something to shock you. That they'll throw something in there because they want to shock you. In this case, yes, it was shocking, but I feel like if you really think about it, it makes a ton of sense. I mean, Cena's coming back. He's the Hollywood guy. Why not link up with The Rock, who's the Hollywood guy? Even if you look at The Rock comments when this whole angle started a few months ago, when he said this doesn't necessarily, the thing with Cody, mentioned this, necessarily have to lead to a match. He was actually telling the truth there, because it's not going to lead to a match. I'm assuming Rock is just going to be in the corner of Cena at WrestleMania. So I don't believe he's wrestling this year. So even by doing that, he was telling the truth. But I just thought it was just so well done. Nobody expected to see Cena as a heel in his final year in wrestling. And I think it was perfectly done. I could have done without the performer. I'm drawing a blank on his name, but the guy that
Me
was
too. Why is he there?
the rapper.
Why?
Yeah. I mean, this is just me being old too. I have no idea. I don't even know who this guy is. I know he's a really popular rapper.
Yeah, I mean, he is, that guy. I mean, he is really, really popular, and I know I was teasing Bob that it's Kylie Jenner's baby daddy, but anyhow, I do think that the turn was so successful that I actually think Cena is going to win the match. I think he's going to stay heel. I think he's going to win the match. I hope that they get to CM Punk against Cody, which I think would be, you talk about breaking box office records. that's the match I would have went with at this WrestleMania, but maybe they're saving it for SummerSlam, which again will break all the records. But yeah, so far they're off to a great start. They're making tons of money. Triple H has made everybody forget about Vince, and Vince is going to probably start his own promotion reportedly. So we'll see how that goes.
My other problem with the angle was I just think it was too long. You know, they kept beating him why do they have to beat everybody for 20 minutes? You know, every time there's a heel turn or something, spectacular going on, 1 isn't enough, 3 isn't enough, 9 of whatever they're doing is, well, okay, we'll do it 9 times to the guy. You know, it's like, yeah, it's just, I don't know.
But I'll tell you guys something.
No, to me, it stretches credibility when you're beating someone up that long and he's not like, well, I don't know, dead.
No, I agree with you on that. That was way overdone, and it should have shortened it. It would have been more effective as a shorter beat down rather than a long, forever beat down. But I didn't watch the event live. I don't have Peacock anymore because they sent me this humongous bill, and I wasn't going to pay the bill. But anyhow, the next day, I'm recapping. I'm getting all this information secondhand, and I read Bob's posts on the event and everything, and it must have been a slow news day because. Like on CNN and different websites I went to, there was all this about the event. I mean, there was like a stack of, news. John Cena turned heel. This happened, and it must have been a slow news day because it was all over the place. That's all anybody talked about on social media was this event, and it wasn't even WrestleMania. It was just like the precursor to WrestleMania. So they did a great job with it.
A slow news day in the United States?
Well, I will just say one other quick thing about this, it's sort of related, is that, I'll be honest too, when this thing started and The Rock came out and did that, I want your soul bit, I was one of the people, just like a lot of other people, I was texting my friend, this is ridiculous, this is so dumb, they've kind of jumped the shark, and, I don't even think they know what they're doing anymore. But I will say that it paid off. And I think it's sort of a lesson to just always kind of give them the benefit of the doubt, or at least let them tell the story, because I was already just kind of basically saying, oh, this is going nowhere. And I think they just run out of ideas, and The Rock just wanted to come out, and it was sort of an ego thing. And obviously it wasn't. They had this long-term plan. And I think that's a testament to Paul Levesque, Triple H. It's like, look, I'm not going to sit here and say he's perfect and sing his praises and say he's the greatest thing that ever happened to them. But I will say, I think more so than not, he does a really, really good job. And I think he really takes it seriously enough. And I think you have to do that.
No, I agree with that. Well, very well said.
Well, I'll leave this topic with this. It was a couple days earlier on Facebook, and I'm rummaging around in all these wrestling threads that I go on, and various other podcasts have threads and all this other stuff. And somebody showed a picture of John Cena holding up breakfast on a sign at McDonald's, wearing a bow tie and a sweater. And they go, "Look at this! What's Cena doing serving me breakfast?" And I type in, and this isn't a direct quote, but this is what I type in: "See, there's not going to be any heel turn." Guess what happened the next day? So I honestly, he's the voice of, what is it, Honda? He does the voiceovers for Honda cars, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He also does a ton of ads for other things, and is in all these family films and TV shows and what have you. So yeah, the heel turn in that regard is kind of surprising. And the Make-A-Wish thing and all that too. How do you equate this now? Very interesting to see how this works.
It's true.
Either that or Cena's swerving The Rock. Who knows?
Interesting.
So because it could be really interesting at WrestleMania. Maybe there's another swerve that will be served. So anyway, we're gonna veer back into why we're here. It's WrestleMania, as we say up in Greene County, up WrestleMania, and I'm gonna go back to the first one. Only because it was a sort of a cultural event and a big, loud, noisy, star-studded 1985 happening at MSG, where Vince McMahon really stuck his neck on the line at WrestleMania 1. If that thing failed, he was going to probably go out of business, because business had been bad. And you know what? According to everything I've read about it, it had to succeed or he was in trouble. And it succeeded far past anybody's wildest imagination. But I'll put the Hogan and Mr. T versus Paul Orndorff and Roddy Piper match as an important moment in WrestleMania history, only in that it was the first main event, and it really did capture the interest of mainstream media. I mean, they were on Saturday Night Live the night before, Mr. T and Hulk Hogan, and it was the first counterculture, here we come moment for WWF. What do you guys think?
No, absolutely. And I mean, Joe's the witness. I mean, here he is. He's a kid with his friends. You know, he sees the VHS tape sitting in the living room. He says, "Hey, put this in the machine," and now he's hooked for life. So he's a good testament to that.
Absolutely. And one of the quick thing about that it just sort of jogged my memory is that I do remember that I was trying to rent that first WrestleMania back when I was a kid every single weekend. And
Really?
every time we went to the video store, it was rented out. Because obviously in those days, they only had a couple of copies of each
Right.
video cassette. And I was so disappointed. So when I finally got my hands on it, I was thrilled. But yeah, I mean, what else can you say about WrestleMania 1? I completely agree. You know, obviously that was monumental, that match. Another thing that I thought was kind of cool, looking back on it, was the King Kong Bundy squash. Only because it was kind of cool. You really didn't see that. I think he probably beat SD Jones. What was it? 8 seconds, 10 seconds, or something like
that.
And if you really think about it, that was a great build, because what were they doing? A year later, Bundy was going to challenge Hogan for the world title. So I mean, right there, they were planting the seeds on Bundy's push.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. That's exactly what they were doing. It was kind of giving you a little foreshadowing that this is probably going to be your next main event next year. But you know, after WrestleMania 1, I would say even to this day, you know, WrestleMania 3 at the Pontiac Silverdome kind of remains, at least in my mind, kind of like the standout memory of all the WrestleMania is just that huge throng of fans, you know, supposedly 93,000, 173,000 fans there in attendance. And, you know, and just the image of seeing, you know, all the fans in attendance, you know, and Vince coming out, giving his booming introduction of Welcome to WrestleMania. That was really, really exciting at the time.
I have just received an advanced copy of Keith Elliott Greenberg's new book on WrestleMania 3.
Uh-huh.
And I'm hoping to have him on the show. I haven't asked him yet, but I hope to get him on to talk about it. It is I've just been going through it. I'm starting to go through it. Boy, is it good. Boy, is this going to be a big book, because you know what? It's so meticulously researched, and it's almost like a history lesson of all wrestling in the mid to late 80s. It's fantastic. So there's something to look out for. But I will say this. Yeah, I look at WrestleMania 3 as my personal favorite. I remember myself and a reporter friend, this was a couple of years before I started with the magazine. So I had, you know, we went in, got a pizza, we watched it at my mom's house, and we really enjoyed the show from soup to nuts. And I thought the wrestling quality went up so far from 1 and 2 to 3. I mean, Steamboat versus Randy Savage is an all-time classic. Some people still consider it one of the greatest matches of all time. It's hard to argue with that. But again, everybody wanted to see Andre versus Hogan. They just did. That match is not on my list because it's not a personal favorite, but I understand the importance of it for sure. They didn't need to have an undercard as good as they had, and the undercard was pretty doggone good on that show. So what a success. Again, multicultural deal with celebrities there, and, you know, national publicity from non-wrestling people. It just was huge. Just huge event on a Sunday afternoon. Just incredible.
So Joe, you as a young fan who had enjoyed discovering WrestleMania 1, and of course you got hooked after that, like, how was WrestleMania 3 for you as a young fan?
WrestleMania 3, I mean, I honestly feel like for those of us who grew up in the 80s, where that was the height of our fandom, I just don't think there was anything bigger, and I don't think there really ever will be anything bigger. I mean, sure, there might be bigger WrestleManias as far as box office and this and that, but as far as from a fan standpoint, it's just everybody from that generation will always consider that the big one. That's the one that everybody remembers, obviously, because of Hogan Andre. I thought the build was perfect for that show. I mean, the way Andre turned on the Piper's Pit and with Ventura there, and just everything about it was just so perfectly done, and it just had me hooked. I also always loved the look of that show, that I had really never seen a show from a venue that large. And I remember that it started out and it was bright and sunny. And then as the night wore on, it kind of got darker. And by the time Hogan and Andre wrestled, it was sort of dark and mystifying, and it was just so cool. It's such great memories. And obviously Steamboat Savage. I mean, everybody talks about that. How can you go wrong with that match? And, not to harp on Bundy, but how funny is it that Bundy in WrestleMania 2 was challenging for the world title? And a year later, he was in a 6-man tag with Hillbilly Jim and a bunch of midgets.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And similarly, Bobby Heenan in WrestleMania 3 is in the main event with Andre, and WrestleMania 4, he's wearing the Beekeeper's outfit, going to the ring against with the Islanders against the Bulldogs and Matilda. I mean, talk about a fall from grace. But but
Exactly.
yeah, agreeing with you, fellas, the Savage Steamboat match has to again be reiterated as is still one of the essential great matches of all time. Still one of the great WrestleMania matches of all time. But after you guys, after those early WrestleManias, and I think Randy Savage is one of the huge MVPs of the early WrestleManias. After those WrestleManias, were there any others that stood out to you after that?
Well, let's stick with this one because I have two more favorite matches on that card.
Well, let's hear it.
Oh, wow.
This is a personal thing with me. Harley Race beating the Junkyard Dog and the bow to the loser match or bow to the
Right.
winner.
Right.
He had to bow to the king, Harley Race then. And the reason that's an all-time favorite match of mine is real simple. It was Harley Race's last big moment.
Really?
If you really think about it, he wrestled for another about year and a half. He never won a title in the WWE.
Right.
He got hurt. Not that much longer after that because he was the next contender for Hogan after the Andre feud died down.
That's right. That's
So
right.
they went to the arenas and Harley Race was the champion. I believe that's where he had his abdominal problem and it kind of curtailed his career right then and there. So it really was his last big moment. For me, I'm very sentimental about that because I think Harley Race was just about good as it gets. So
Yeah.
while it wasn't a classic match, you got to see a lot of those classic Harley Race bumps, and that was enough for me. And to see him get a Duke at WrestleMania 3, I thought it was really cool. And the other one I thought was an important match was the Roddy Piper retirement match against Adrian Adonis. The place went unglued when he locked him in a sleeper hold. And
Yeah.
and that was they sold tickets to see that match because they had developed a good feud, and that was a nice capper on it. And it was a well-paced card, and those were my favorite matches from that particular show.
Well, when Piper walked to the ring, I mean, he was the only one that walked to the ring because he was Piper. Piper did things his own way. He walked to the ring. He didn't go one of those little dinky little carts. And I will add to your other comment. I don't think a lot of people know this, but the JYD match against Harley Race, that was intended to be JYD's final WWF match because they were kind of like letting him go. He was going to leave the Federation. But in the ensuing months, they lost Duggan with the drug bust with the Sheik in New Jersey. They lost Jake Roberts due to suspension. They lost Steamboat because he was having a kid. So they brought JYD back in June, and he stayed on the roster for another year and a half after that. So
Oh,
I
wow.
had no idea either. Yeah.
Yeah, I did not know that either. But
Mm.
yeah, that is a cool fact. And one quick thing I will say too, just before we move on from WrestleMania 3, I also received Keith Greenberg's book in the mail the other day from the publishing company, and I'm dying. I haven't started yet, but I'm also I just can't wait to sink my teeth into it because Keith's great. And I mean, I don't know that there's ever been a book, one book on just WrestleMania 3, unless I'm wrong. Correct me if I'm
no,
wrong.
you're right. You're right.
Yeah, so I'm looking forward to reading that too. Yeah, I'll talk to you about that, Bob, as well.
Well, he's the perfect person to write a book like that because he was around then, and working for them then, and it just works great. All right, more matches for more WrestleManias, guys. Is there any that pop up to you, or should I continue on with my silly list?
Well, one match that isn't like near WrestleMania 1, 2, or 3, but many years in the future, and this match kind of transcended WrestleMania, and I think this match took them into that next generation. Was that match where Bret Hart wrestled Stone Cold, and we had referee Ken Shamrock, and that was the match where I think Bret won on submission. I think he knocked Stone Cold out with a sharpshooter, and Austin lost all that blood. And that was a really interesting match in the sense of not only was it a great wrestling match, but it was kind of the return of the blood in wrestling, and it showed kind of a more hardcore WWF after all the years of the silliness and the Doink the Clowns and the Duke the Drozies and all that stuff. It kind of returned them back to their meat and potatoes of real wrestling and hardcore wrestling.
Well, that's a good point. So that one, I believe, was WrestleMania 13, and what was that, 97, I guess.
That's right.
And I think that was probably the main standout moment of that show. I don't think there were really many more from that one, but I think that was also, like you said, I mean, that was exactly when the Attitude Era was really starting, right? I mean, it was like 96 was probably the last year when they were still sort of in that transition, but 97, from there on, they just took off. So
Right.
I remember that very, very vividly as well. Brought my interest, not that I ever stopped watching, but it definitely sort of reignited the flame a bit for me with that match. It was just so good, it was such a needed spark at that time.
Yeah.
I think
Go ahead,
Steve
go ahead,
made a
Bob.
good. I think Steve made a good point earlier that it gave WWF at that point some really needed realism in a wrestling match. It wasn't kid stuff. It looked like a fight, and they needed that. They didn't need the characters. They need to get a little more serious. And who better than those two guys? I mean, really, that's an indelible moment. You're absolutely right, Steve. Everybody remembers looking at that sharpshooter.
That's right.
So
Yeah.
anyway, I'm going to go back in time a little bit
Let's hear it.
to WrestleMania 6 at the Skydome in Toronto in another not good match, but it was an important match. Ultimate Warrior, who was the IC champion at the time, beats Hogan for the world title. Now, I am not a Ultimate Warrior fan in any way, shape, or form. I just thought that was the height of comic book stuff.
Get out of here, huh?
But yeah, you think, yeah. But there was something about that moment of like, they shook hands after the thing and saluted each other and all that. A lot of people didn't believe Hogan could be beat, and he finally got beat. And that's a huge moment. It's almost like Bruno losing the Koloff, if you think about it in terms of eras. So I think that's an important moment, and that's why that match is on my list.
Well, it definitely deserves special attention. And the interesting thing about it, and I remember watching it live at the time, I mean, the rest of that card was okay. There was nothing really that stood out about the rest of the card. But they put on a hell of a match. I mean, Warrior wasn't known for being a good worker, but they had their own unique match that they had kind of planned out. And I think Pat Patterson helped to rehearse the match. But they put on a hell of a performance. And it was kind of intended to be, hey Hogan, we're going to turn you into Bruno. You're going to come and pop a house when needed. And Warrior, you're the new greatest thing since sliced bread. You're going to carry the company. But it didn't really turn out that way. It didn't really work out that way. And Joe, what would you like to add to that?
I would say that match actually exceeded my expectations. I know, Bob, you mentioned that you didn't. I guess you weren't that crazy about the match itself.
No. The match was actually pretty good because they kept it simple. If you remember, there's a lot of tests of strength and
Yes,
a lot of just power moves as opposed
every move
to,
really meant something. Like
yes, it did. And you would wonder who was the more powerful between the two when they're locking up finger to fingers. And it's like you can't make a call because they were really kind of equal in that regard. So no, it wasn't that the match was bad. I'm not a Warrior fan. That's all I'm saying. But I would be blind not to look back at the significance of that moment in wrestling history. Whether it was good for wrestling or bad for wrestling after that point, that's for you guys to decide.
See, at the time, I just remember being in school and, everybody was a wrestling fan at that point. And I just remember everybody was picking a side. I remember it was me and my friends, and some of the people were Hogan people, some were Warrior people. And I'll admit, I mean, look, as the years went on, my support and fandom of the Warriors sort of waned. But at the time, I really thought he was sort of appealing to me. The young kid at the time. I thought he was a cool character. He definitely got my interest level up. Thought it was a really good match for what it was. And one other point I'll make about that show is that I do remember thinking WrestleMania, that was WrestleMania 6. WrestleMania 6 felt big again after a couple of years that I felt it kind of fell a little bit under the radar just because they were at the small venue in New Jersey. They were at Trump Plaza, and I just didn't feel like it felt like a WrestleMania. But when they did WrestleMania 6 in 1990, I felt like it became huge again from a venue standpoint, almost like a Pontiac Silverdome type thing. So I do want to say that I felt that they really, really upped the game for that show.
No, I agree with that. Now, another match that is at the time was state of the art, and it holds up well today, was from WrestleMania. I think it was WrestleMania 10 at the Garden. It was the one with Shawn Michaels against Razor Ramon, the ladder match.
Yep.
That's on my list too. That put ladder matches on the map. That match did. It really did.
And it kind of put Razor Ramon on the map too. I know a lot of the snarky fans at the time were saying, Shawn Michaels could have had that match with a broomstick or whatever, but Razor Ramon, give the poor guy his due. I mean, he had a long haul going from Scott Hall and Starship Eagle and whatever else he had been, the Diamond Stud and WCW. But finally, the Razor Ramon gimmick caught hold, and him and Michaels tore the house down. They had a tremendous match, and people still remember that match.
They definitely do. It's also pretty amazing that they've done so many ladder matches since then in the WWE, and they've just taken it to different levels each time. That if you go back and watch that match now, don't get me wrong, it's incredible. There's some incredible feats in that match. When you look at what they've done since then, it's almost tame compared to them, which is pretty crazy. Not to take anything away from the match, but it shows you just how much it's evolved even since then. My first WrestleMania that I did see live.
Wow.
WrestleMania 10. Yeah, I went to the Garden for that show. It was my first one, so that'll always be a great memory for that reason alone. And don't forget that match, the opening match at that show was Bret Hart and Owen Hart.
That's right. A classic match.
Incredible match. Yeah, and Owen went over, which was also really cool because nobody expected that.
Very interesting.
I'm going to go to 1993. Caesar's Palace, Las Vegas, the preposterous finish to that show. But it stuck with me all these years when Yokozuna pins Bret Hart, and then Hogan. I'm a little fuzzy on it. I just remember Hogan hitting the scene, and then Hogan pins Yokozuna right then and there, and the fans were up, and I thought it sucked, but I always remembered it. It was like, I don't know why they did such an abrupt three-way oddity thing and how a match could be sanctioned for the title right then and there. I watched the whole thing with my mouth hanging open going, what the? But there it was. Hogan returns as the champion in 1993.
I know my friend John McAdam that I do the podcast with, he had said that that was one of the rare WrestleManias that he wasn't watching it for whatever reason. And he said that a friend of him at work told him the next day, hey, did you hear who won at WrestleMania? And the guy told him that Hulk Hogan won the title back. And then, of course, John's like, how could that happen? Since he wasn't even supposed to be wrestling in that title match. So that was kind of funny.
That'll always be, I think, of the glory of the first 10 WrestleManias. That's probably my least favorite, just because I was so disappointed by that ending when Hogan came out. I mean, there were a couple of good matches on that. I'm trying to think back. I feel like I'm pretty sure it was that one. It was Shawn Michaels and Tatanka at that show, and I do remember that being a pretty good match. I think the Steiners had a good match on that show. It's a little foggy just because of that ending. I could never get past it. And let's not forget, that was Jim Ross's debut.
That's right.
And Jim Ross, though,
in a toga. I hate to snicker, but we were all laughing at that point. I mean, it was just real silly, but Caesar's Palace, good gravy.
Yeah.
By the way, Brett got his just due the next year, because he beat Yokozuna to win the title back at the next WrestleMania.
Yes,
absolutely.
That made my list as well.
Well, I want to jump way ahead to the WrestleMania that they did at Safeco Field in Seattle. This is like either like 2002, 2003. And there were two matches that really stood out to me. I wanted to share with you guys. I'm sure you remember these. There was a match where the official main event match was world champion Kurt Angle against the young Brock Lesnar. and they had a phenomenal match. And I think at one point, Angle was giving Lesnar a superplex off the top rope. And I think Kurt landed wrong, and he practically almost broke his neck during the match.
Yeah.
Somehow he was able to continue the match and win, and I think won the match. Maybe I think he won the match, but that was a tremendous match. And I think Kurt Angle, along with Randy Savage, would be on my short list of best WrestleMania performers. I have to say that. But then the other match, which to this day I thought was a fantastic match in storytelling, not a great wrestling match if you're looking for technical wrestling, but the great storytelling of Vince McMahon wrestling Hulk Hogan with special guest Roddy Piper appearing at the end as the hooded guy coming in with a jacket on and a hood over him. And they told a great story in that match. And it was just tremendous seeing the guys that started WrestleMania wrestling each other. Vince was so jacked up at this point. He was bigger than Hogan was in size. And they put on a hell of a match. They told an incredible story, and they bled buckets, and Piper was there, and Piper was very key to the finish. That was a standout in all of WrestleMania. To me, that was a standout match.
I take umbrage with the Angle thing. I mean, come on, he's never had a 5-star match. What are you talking about? Dun, 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 bang! All right.
There you go.
And hey, look, you mentioned Vince having, a good match for what it was. Don't take anything, away from Vince in his matches when he had that run with Austin and he was out there wrestling. I mean, of course, is the guy a fantastic technical wrestler? No, but he could tell a story. I mean, there was no bump he wouldn't take. You got to give him that, and you know what? Say the same for Shane. I mean, now that we're talking about McMahon, Shane did the same thing. Neither of them had the ability to be good workers or professional wrestlers, but they both gave it they gave it their all, So I always appreciated what they did.
Yeah, Shane was fearless. There's no doubt about that.
No, I give him credit for that too. And he was fearless a lot. I mean, every time it was a big match, he was flying all over the place, literally in so many different matches. So I give him credit for that. I really do. Yeah. What do we got here? I'll never forget Edge versus Mick Foley from WrestleMania 22.
Really?
Which is my favorite Mick Foley moment, way more than the cage with The Undertaker.
Really?
I just thought it was a better match. It was a really violent, nasty brawl. Very, and very serious looking, very intense. I just remember that one because I thought Mick was awesome in that match. And that's why it's one of my favorites. I'm a big friend of Mick Foley, and I think it was one of his best moments. Joe, what do you think?
That's good. Yeah, I'll be completely honest. I'm trying to at that era. Sometimes the matches kind of blend together. So
They do.
Yes, I'm trying to think about that one specifically. Was it a regular match or was it a hardcore match?
It was sort of a hardcore match because I remember there was barbed wire involved and all this other stuff, and it was the usual nonsensical.
Right.
Where'd you get that from? Foreign objects galore, death-defying leaps. It was one of those deals. But Edge was at his absolute prime at that point, and Mick was kind of winding down a little bit, and it was still a nice juxtaposition of two different types of guys who were just going at it tooth and nail. It just was, to me, a tremendous match.
I know Edge gets a lot of bad notices for what he's doing in AEW now, but for a time in his prime peak era, like say in the early 2000s to mid 2000s, to me he was an all-star, a Hall of Famer for that period of time. He would be a Hall of Famer in my book. Maybe not like a Babe Ruth, but definitely in the Hall of Fame for wrestling. Still, he accomplished so much.
Absolutely true. Going down my silly list, another great brawl from WrestleMania 39. Gunther versus Sheamus versus Drew McIntyre. Good gosh.
Wow.
Do you remember this? Is just recently. That was a great match. I mean, it wasn't the main event, but people are still talking about that one. Right? I mean, it was just, nobody expected it to be as wild and woolly as it was, and it was a tremendous finish. I mean, and a definitive finish for Gunther. Great, just a great match. I'm sorry, it was a great match. I don't usually cotton to three-ways. This one rang my bell and sent me right to the lunchroom, man. It was just spiffy.
Well, one
Yeah.
one thing I agree with you, Bob. I mean, Gunther is so good, and he has been telling these great stories in the ring and for great performances. He's another guy. I mean, he hasn't really reached his peak yet. I mean, he's still improving, but I think if he keeps on this run that he's on, eventually he'll be a Hall of Famer as well. I mean, he's just magnificent in the ring.
All right, let me ask you two guys. Jay, you still going to beat him? Jay's got momentum. I hate to say it. And here's the thing: Gunther is so good that he could do 3 months without the belt and still keep his stardom. I don't think it would even hurt him. What do you guys
Well,
think?
I'm gonna
well,
say no. My gut is that Gunther keeps the belt.
Okay.
I
How about
mean,
you? How about you, Steve?
Well, I am leaning to seeing Cena win the match, and if he wins the match, they do have to do something to send the fans home happy. So having Gunther get beat would send the fans home happy.
yeah,
Oh. Ah.
Bob, you'll survive it.
No, yeah, well, it's like you see, as Brian R. Solomon once said wisely, man does not live by wrestling alone. That's an entire weekend out of my life that I'm going to sit
Right.
there watching, Jackie Redmond do a pregame show, and then we're going to get to the matches, and I, it's a lot. That's a lot of time. You know what's amazing too? The pay-per-view this past weekend. What was there? 5 matches?
yeah, something like that. Yeah,
Yeah, that was all it was in a football stadium. Amazing. They're printing money. It's unreal.
Well,
but it was
I
still how
want to,
long? I mean, it
I
was
want
still
to.
what 3.5 hours.
Yeah.
Yeah, for 5 matches, that's something. But I wanted to ask you guys something too. We've talked about the great matches. We've talked about a lot of the great moments. But one thing that I'm always interested in is the history and the Hall of Fame. And I'm a mark for the WWF Hall of Fame, and they really made a big point at WrestleMania 20 in New York at MSG. I think it was like 2003 or 2004. That was the one where Billy Graham, Harley Race, Pete Rose, Jesse Ventura, Tito Santana, JYD, a whole bunch of people got put in all together at the same time. And that was kind of when they returned the Hall of Fame to this kind of made it more of an important event. They started releasing the videos. They started including it in the WrestleMania videos or DVDs that would be released. Do any of you guys have any memories of the Hall of Fame? And I know Bob attended the one that Bruno
Mhm.
was inducted, and then Mick Foley was inducted, and Bob Backlund was inducted all on the same
Right.
night.
Yeah.
Joe, did you attend that too? Since you go to the MSG shows too?
I that was the actual Hall of Fame that I was at as well. Yeah,
Wow,
I was at that
fantastic!
one.
Well, I want to hear from both of you then. What was that like?
Other than the screaming Mark sitting behind me, I oh, they were annoying. God almighty. But no, in all seriousness, I was so proud to be there, to see my old friend Mick Foley getting into the Hall of Fame. Little did we ever dream when John Arisa and I were riding in a car with Mick Foley in 1989 or whatever it was, that he would be a Hall of Fame wrestler eventually. It just was like the culmination of all his hard work. I just loved it. And I loved hearing Bruno Sammartino's thoughts about wrestling magazines during his acceptance speech.
Hmm.
To
Yeah,
me, it absolutely cemented the importance of the wrestling magazine as a vital part of wrestling culture for decades. And I was proud to be. I'm showing people my little pinky here. That much of that, I was a little part of that. But Bruno said that the exposure to wrestling magazines, which went worldwide, enabled him to become a star internationally, as well as like in New York and Pittsburgh and his usual home area, or go to Indianapolis and wrestle with Dick the Bruiser and stuff like that, and other territories, Los Angeles, you name it. If it wasn't for the magazines, he said that never would have happened for him. He's the only wrestler I know of, especially one of that stature, to get up and credit the wrestling magazines for helping his career. And I don't know, that made me feel a little googly inside because it was like, first of all, I love Bruno anyway. And Bruno, in my dealings with him, the first time I ever talked to him, I talked to him for 10 minutes. It felt like I knew him for 10 years. He was that kind. No, he was that kind of a man. He really was. And when when you see him again a year later, he remembers you. He's one of those people. It's just every bit of champion in and out of the ring. And I loved Bruno dearly. And Bill Apter really loved. They had a real close friendship, Bruno and Bill Apter did. So it meant a lot to me to see him get inducted in the Hall of Fame. It was only a few decades too late, but I'm glad it finally happened. And that's the last pro wrestling event I paid to see.
Wow.
That's the last time I've been to a major arena wrestling card.
Well,
I'm
nothing's
old.
gonna
I'm waiting
no
for my senior citizen discount. You know how that
well,
works.
nothing's gonna top that anyhow, but what you said really resonated with me. Is really remarkable what you just said. The magazines that you worked on, Bob, and the magazines that I, found, pocket change to go and buy, like the Ring Wrestling or the
Mhm.
Kaiser mags, those same magazines were all over the world. They were in Japan, they were in
Yeah.
Australia, and like Bruno said, they made him a star all over the world, those magazines, because he was usually on the cover of them, and they sold like hotcakes. So it worked perfectly. But Joe, you were there. What did you think of that night?
I don't have, I kind of would have to concur with Bob, what Bob said. I think, I guess Mick and Bruno were the two highlights. I got to say, Bruno was probably even more so than Mick. I just felt because of the history and because of how big, I mean, not that Mick, not that Foley didn't have great history in New York too, being from Long Island. But I just think because of the history and Bruno and the sellouts and just how big he really was, I just felt really honored. I remember thinking I felt so good to actually be at that show to see Bruno get inducted. And yeah, I had met Bruno a few times and I mean, what else can you say about him? One of the nicest, most humble men I've ever met, in the business. He just, there are so many stories too where he never wanted to charge for his autograph.
Right.
Or maybe charge for pictures, or he just loved his fans. And actually he has a lot in common with Mick, now that I think about it, with that, because Mick is also such a great person to his fans too, and the way he treats them. But it was really cool. I mean, it was a great night, and I was so happy I went to that one for sure.
No,
Me too. Me too.
those are great memories. I'm really glad you guys could share those. And and for me, as a being a Bruno fan since the first year I became a fan in 1976, what really made it a historic night for me, even though I wasn't there. I mean, I watched it on TV. It was like I had known the whole story about the whole bad blood with him and Vince, and Bruno left the WWF in '88 under bad terms, and a lot of bad things had happened then, and they were really on bad terms with each other in the subsequent years. Bruno kind of badmouthed Vince and the company and all the steroid stuff and all the other allegations that happened after that. But to see them embrace on the stage and to see Vince, lift Bruno's hand up there with Schwarzenegger was very, very, it felt like they had come full circle and they were friends again. And Bruno brought such a great, for a first class reputation to that company, and they definitely need that kind of first class feeling with people like Vince there and some of the shenanigans that have gone on over the years. But were there any other memories or any other thoughts? Did you guys have any feelings about seeing Bob Backlund's induction and the speech that he gave, which was kind of unusual?
He was very unusual that night. And after I forget when this was. It was the end of the night, or if it was right after he went racing through the crowd and was high fiving everybody in the stands, all over the place. He was manic. But that's the modern Backlund there. He's become kind of a wacky character, kind of in between Mr. Backlund and the old why Backlund.
What?
I don't know how else to put it. Where we had his belt was smashed, right? Why? That's number two too. They were identical, but we won't get into that. But I got Steve laughing anyway. But no, it's like he was flaky, but endearingly flaky.
Right.
He was just there to have a good time. You could tell he took it seriously, but not too seriously, which I kind of like. It's like when Jerry Lawler was inducted.
Right.
He spent a lot of time telling just old school tales, and didn't look. He didn't make it feel like, well, I have accomplished everything on my life's journey. None of that BS. He was just there to have a good time with everybody else, his friends and his fans. And I think that in a way that it's still wrestling. And I think that to give that community more credit rather than, your careers is kind of cool. And I think Lawler did that. And I think Backlund did that too.
Backlund has always been one of those guys that I was always unsure about where the gimmick began and ended.
Right.
Right.
I could never tell if he was really certifiable, if this is the way this really was. And the way
If he was really, wait a minute, really
well, let,
certifiable?
let me explain. I saw him maybe 5 or 6 years ago at an 80s convention in New Jersey, and he was being interviewed. And the guy just goes up on stage. He gets interviewed. He just stops the interview midway. He starts doing like push-ups on the stage, showing his great strength at this age. And then they asked him a question. And instead of answering the question, he literally just said, "I'm done." He got off the stage and he walked out. He literally walked out of the venue and he got in his car and he left. I mean, he literally was done for the day. And I was like, I don't know, is this his gimmick or is this guy really got a screw loose? I still to this day don't know if he's just always in character. I don't know.
Certifiable is a little strong, don't you think? I mean, geez.
Hey,
No, I think with him, he was very awkward. The original Bob Backlund that we knew and loved in the 70s up to the early 80s, he was very shy and very introverted. And it seemed like when he went heel in the 90s, it was almost like he found his voice. He found his gimmick in wrestling, so to speak. And you're absolutely right, Joe. It just seems like, where does this gimmick begin and end? I mean, it just seemed like he became that Mr. Backlund character, and rather than, I think myself, and I know I talked to Brian Solomon about this. We were hoping to see, a Bob Backlund that would, embrace his Hall of Fame, and just be gracious about it and talk about the great matches with Valentine and Patera and Morocco. But instead, he was just like, getting ready to do like 1,000 push-ups or recite the presidents or whatever. I mean, it just got old and got kind of goofy. And and I know he's ailing now. He's got dementia. Apparently, he's not ill. He's not in good health, and I feel bad about that. But I just felt that was a misstep, that he wanted to do his Hall of Fame in character rather than just accept it graciously and look back on those great days as champion in the 70s and the 80s.
yeah, for sure. I agree.
Well, I like you guys didn't. I thought he was fun, but that was just me. I thought he added a kind of a lilt to the seriousness of a couple of the other people who were there. So,
Sure.
each to their own. That's fine. Any other WrestleMania matches you guys want to chat about? We've been shooting the breeze here for 1 hour, folks, and I'm hoping you're enjoying it out there in podcast land. And I know we're having fun. Maybe we should look at wrapping it up a little bit. Is there any other matches that you think we left off the WrestleMania list of greats? I got a few here. I mean, Kurt Angle versus Shawn Michaels again. The Daniel Bryan night was an exciting night. Rhea Ripley versus Charlotte Flair. Come on.
Yeah.
I mean, that's maybe, well, that was my match of the year. I called that one my match of the year last year or the year before, whenever that was. That was just, oof. So that, as you sit down, you could even do Cody beating Roman Reigns for the title in an all-star schmaz. I mean, so many people were involved in that match. It was almost like silly, but it still was fun. I mean, there are some moments you never forget, even if the matches weren't like technical classics.
I will
Nobody
say,
does that like WWE. They don't have to be superb athleticism to be memorable.
I will say that Cody against Rollins was a match that took me back to being a kid. I thought I was watching a real wrestling match. That's how good they were. I believed I was watching a match. That was phenomenal. And like you said, Rhea Ripley against Charlotte Flair, that was state of the art. Rhea Ripley, if you ask me who are your top 5 or your top 10 all-time WrestleMania performers, God, she's got to be close to the top 5 if she's not already in the top 5. She's phenomenal.
Mm-hmm. Joe, anything else for you?
I'll just throw out, we talked about Bret Hart in a couple of matches, and I just there are a few other matches of his from WrestleMania that we didn't mention. Don't forget 1996 when Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels did the 1 hour
Right.
Iron Man match, which was just
Right.
an incredible match. I mean, thinking that these two guys went out there for an hour, that was really incredible. Another one was the Indianapolis WrestleMania in 92, when Brett and Piper had a really cool brawl, a really good match right there. And going back even further, remember the second WrestleMania? I'm sorry, not the second. I'm getting confused now. Was it WrestleMania 4 when they had the Battle Royal that Bad News Brown won? I think that was 4. And Bret Hart was thrown out at the end by Bad News Brown, if you remember that. The reason why I want to point that one out is that was the beginning of the Bret Hart babyface turn. Bret Hart turned face, I would say, a couple of weeks after that. And I mean, look at what he's become. He became one of their biggest stars ever. I think Neidhart turned face as well after that, but obviously he was separated by him at that point. But while, probably a lot of people don't remember that Battle Royal that closely, I always thought it was cool for that fact because nobody expected to see Bret Hart in there right at the end with Bad News. And that sort of started his whole babyface run.
But that was the one where he was in the ring for like an hour or something like that, right? He was in there like forever, if I recall.
I don't remember how long it was. I'm getting confused too.
But I hate to cut you off, but I remember Dave Rosenbaum writing in one of his columns. He said, "Is Bret Hart the best wrestler in the WWF?" And he talked about his performance in that battle royal and how long he stayed in the ring. So it was a long time.
Yeah,
like 45 minutes or some crazy thing. And that may have been the beginning of his superstardom, to be honest with you, as a solo performer. There's no question.
And Joe mentioned a very important match that I'd also like to mention. That night that Piper gave him the rub in Indianapolis.
Yeah,
Piper never did jobs in the WWF, or if he did, very, very rarely. And him giving Bret the rub, that anointed Bret, that finally moved him up into that main event echelon he had never been in before. And Bret stayed there right until the Montreal screw job, and then he went to WCW. So, Bret was a main event superstar after that.
That's a good point. And you bringing up that Indianapolis Mania, remember that was also the show Savage and Flair, and that was a huge storyline at the time. The whole Elizabeth thing. When Flair had those doctored photos of Elizabeth, and I'll always remember when Flair said, "Savage, she was mine before she was yours." And that just always stuck with me. And watching wrestling at that period of my life, I just thought that was such a cool storyline,
Well, maybe we could end the show with this idea. And I'll ask both of you guys this question. Do you think that what would have been the perfect time to do Hogan against Flair at WrestleMania? Like if we could turn back time and we could just make them a main event of one of the years,
right after he joined,
really?
And they didn't do it.
Mm-hmm.
They did a house show tour.
Well, that would have been that WrestleMania, the Indianapolis one,
right? But they didn't do it. They didn't even consider it, which only goes to show you the WWF at that point in its history, or if it was whatever they called it at that point, doesn't care about wrestling history. Whatever you did, the NWA doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody else in the world, serious fans looked at Hogan, Flair as the two greatest champions going up against each other.
Yeah.
WWE never thought that way. They never did. They just, they brought in Flair almost as if he was a new character that nobody ever heard of or saw before.
Right.
Whatever look at Harley Race. They never referred to all those world championships he won. So that is a real flaw with WWF, that they would just, wherever you were from before, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And I think that's the whole mindset back then. They were convinced that they ran it in the house shows. Some gates were good, like New York did a great gate. Others kind of fizzled. They just thought nobody cared.
And they wound up doing Hogan and Vicious at that show, which I mean is really, does anybody even remember that match? I mean,
nobody does. Nobody does.
Nobody does. No, nobody does. And let's not forget the greatest matches WrestleMania history. I mean, Refrigerator Perry. Come on. How about Lawrence Taylor? Huh? Really? Yeah. Right. Hey, how about Johnny Knoxville versus
Sami Zayn?
Zayn.
The mousetrap match.
Oh my gosh, that's like Thez versus O'Connor.
I went to the Lawrence Taylor WrestleMania. That was in Connecticut in 1995. So I went 2 years in a row. I went 94 and 95, and I just remember even at that time thinking like, how are they ending the show with this match? Like I couldn't get over it, and more than the match itself, I always remember that Pamela Anderson and Jenny McCarthy were in attendance. I think they were in the corners of
Diesel.
yeah, right. Diesel and Shawn Michaels. Yeah.
And they were there in their primes, folks.
Yes.
Right.
I hate to be a man at this point, but yeah, they I am telling you, didn't Pam walk Kevin Nash to the ring or
Yes.
something? And
Right.
nobody was looking at Kevin. That's all I have to say about that. But anyway, listen, it's always fun having you here, Steve, and you're a fountain of information, not a fountain of misinformation. Who used to be the fountain of who used to be the fountain of disinformation? Oh, Lou Albano used to say
Lou
that?
Albano, the fat cat Lou Albano, right?
Yeah. But you are a fountain of information and a really groovy guy. And tell us what's going on with you and where we can all hear you all the time. I know all my listeners listen to your show already, but in case there's a few of mine that don't, hype yourself, hype your show, hype your pizza making proclivities. Anything you'd like to talk about?
Well, I'm on a show that it's called John McAdam's Stick to Wrestling. It's on the Arcadian Vanguard Network, and our show comes out every Friday. And we try to talk about old wrestling for the most part from the 70s, 80s, and 90s. But lately, we've been doing a lot of looks back. We just did a look back on the war to settle the score with Hogan against Piper, which led to WrestleMania 1. And that's our most recent episode that's out right now, and people seem to like it. And so I hope you guys listen to that show if you get a chance. But I'm a big, big fan of both of these guys, Bob and Joe, and the Outdated Wrestling Hour, which is always on the top of my listening list on Friday when it comes out, or also the Outdated Entertainment Hour that comes out on Wednesdays. I always listen for those too. So
Well, thank you very much for the ratings point. I do appreciate it. Joe, I believe we talked earlier about your fine website, generationxwire.com, and everybody needs to avail themselves of the most unique, offbeat entertainment website you will ever see. And things are going great with that, as I understand it.
They are going very well. I appreciate it. We haven't done too much wrestling in the past few months on the site, but a lot of other things. We just did one of our writers, JC Correa, just did a really cool review of the new Bob Dylan biopic, Complete Unknown. A few other articles we have coming out. I'm going to be talking to Barry Horowitz in a couple of weeks. I'm going to be doing a feature on him, so that'll kind of bring the wrestling aspect back to the site. But yeah, lots going on with that. Always looking for new things that like we've talked about this, Bob. I like to get offbeat things that you might not see on other websites or other podcasts. I have some other things that are in the works, so I'm hoping everything comes to be. And real quick, Steve, like I was talking to Bob about podcasts on the last episode a little bit, and we were going over all the pods you listen to, and your pod is great. Do it all the time, and I'm somebody, as I told Bob, that can't commit a lot of times to a weekly podcast. It's a little tough just with my schedule, but yours is definitely one that I try to listen to each week. You guys are awesome.
So thank you. I really appreciate that, and it's just really cool. Not only that we do these podcasts together, but we become friends, and we get to share all this information that we don't know about. And I like your contributions and your stories on your website. It's very, very cool.
Fans, look at the two guys I'm sitting here talking to. I got Steve Gennarelli and Joe Puccio. They are the Honus Wagner and Babe Ruth to my Ed Kramer.
Oh man,
I mean,
We'll take it.
how do I get this lucky? I'm telling you. But in any event, Steve, thanks again. Joe, always ginchy. It's WrestleMania season. I hope everybody out there enjoys this year's. Who knows what will happen this year? One thing's for sure. The way they've been running the swerves lately, we have no idea what's going to happen. So it should be fun and exciting. But we're here to talk about the old guys, you young punks. None of them hold a candle to Ilio DiPaolo. So, or people, you know something? Here's the problem with doing an outdated. I really do want to talk about Ilio DiPaolo, but I am deathly afraid that nobody knows who Ilio DiPaolo is. Joe, do you know who Ilio DiPaolo is? No,
I
you don't. You have
fully
no
admit I
earthly clue.
don't.
There you go. He was working when I was a kid. So that's all I can say. Like Louis Martinez and Argentina Apollo. Have you heard of them, Joe?
Them I have, yes.
You have heard of them.
I
Very
have,
good.
yeah.
How about you, Steve? Have you heard of any of those names?
Yeah, I've heard of those names. Yeah.
There you go. Do you care about any of those names?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do.
we listen. If you love wrestling, you care about the history of it too. And in any event, this has been a historical show. Steve, come back soon, will you?
Please invite me back. I'll come back.
See you next week. In any event, we'll be back right after this important word about a certain website that I heard about strictly at random. We'll be right back. Attention, Gen Xers. If you'd like to explore the era that appeals to you, look no further than GenerationXWire.com. The generation who grew up with elite in entertainment, music, movies, TV, books, pro wrestling, and more finally has a one-stop destination for all their Gen X needs. From Aerosmith to Batman to the Killer Bees to the Twilight Zone, there's something for everybody at GenerationXWire.com. You won't find a more eclectic mix of pop culture content than at the leading website that specializes in the greatest generation, GenerationXWire.com. Check it out today. How much fun is it to have Steve Gennarelli on our show? He's really something, and I really appreciate not only his professionalism and his historian-like knowledge. He's just a great guy. He's really a cool cat. And you know that Joe Puccio is all that in a bag of chips too. So anyway, thanks you guys for being here tonight. Now I am holding my day planner in front of me. Yeah, I got a paper one. We got a problem with that? Anyway. In the coming weeks on this show, we come out every Friday. We got a huge array of guests. I'm going to name some of them for you and help you tune back in. Coming up soon is Jamie Ward, podcaster extraordinaire. Our old friend Liam Savage from the wilds of Canada, or actually Toronto. Evan Ginsberg, I was just on his podcast. Now he's coming on mine, the classic New York area wrestling impresario. He's done it all in the wrestling field, and he has a great book out. We'll talk about everything. Howard Baum is coming back. I think that's going to be very cool. Everybody loves Howard. Anthony Pyrus is coming back. One of the funniest and coolest cats I have met since starting this podcast journey. Ian Douglas is coming back to talk about his brand new book, which I can't wait to dig into. I have just received it in the mail, and I want to dig into that. Daniel May, who works with Mario Sivoldi on the Savmar network, the videotape library that just gets bigger and better every day. He's coming on the show. We'll talk about his videotapes and a whole lot more. So we hope you'll stick with us. We got a lot of cool stuff coming up. And I continue to try to make this the most offbeat and enjoyable nostalgia wrestling podcast you will find. Whether I'm succeeding or not, it all depends upon you, and I do appreciate every listener that we have, so thank you so much. To contact us, it's easy, outdatedwrestling@gmail.com. Our website, outdatedwrestlinghour.buzzsprout.com, where you can hear every one of our episodes free of charge. I will never Patreon you to hear old shows. It's all right there. And you can join if you feel like it, you can join our Outdated Wrestling Hour fan club. There's a little black box on the website. For a very nominal fee, like $3 a month, you can contribute to our work here, not only the Outdated Wrestling Hour, but also the Outdated Entertainment Hour, our offshoot podcast. Find me on Facebook. I'm the only Bob Smith singing with the one and only BB King. I am also Outdated Bob on Threads, Blue Sky, and Instagram. So that's about it. Really love the show about our great WrestleMania moments. I'm always interested to find out what yours are too. We all have our favorites, and it's WrestleMania season. It just, it's a harbinger of spring now. When the weather gets a little warmer, you look forward to WrestleMania. I look forward to you coming back and listening again to the Outdated Wrestling Hour. My name is Bob Smith. Thank you for being here. And as I always say as a sign-off, like Ringo Starr says, the sudden country star, peace and love, y'all. Peace and love.